The National Security Force, known as NSF, pairs with a retired cop to catch an eradicator using his clone to study and understand an outlaw's mind. A woman calls 911 due to a trespasser who's about to take her and her baby's life. The police are dispatched immediately, but the outlaw sees the mother and silences her, saying she's a bad mom. He takes her lifeless pictures and places the baby in his cradle while singing a lullaby, declaring that he'll end his nightmares. Shortly after, the police arrive, headed by Jake Riley. Without waiting for the SWAT, he heads to the apartment with his team while the culprit starts to burn the apartment. As they ride the elevator, they see smoke and conclude that the attacker is someone they're hunting. Knowing time is fleeting, Jake barges into the apartment despite the warnings of his partner Angie and hears an infant's cry. He sees the mother's burning body and the crying baby in the crib. He breaks the window and cradles the infant as they escape the collapsing facility through the power generator platform attached to the building. Jake calms the baby down when he notices the outlaw, Torch, heading down the fire exit. He hands the baby over to the cops and chases the outlaw. Jake stops the bus where Torch rides, and upon confirming he's there, he asks the driver to step out with him and discreetly calls for backup. The outlaw threatens the passengers and escapes. Jake pursues him to a parking lot where the culprit awaits him. Torch tries to hit Jake with a car, but the cop spots him and dodges the vehicle. The outlaw watches him roll over in pain before turning around to run over him. Jake shoots the vehicle to no avail and rolls away to save himself. As police sirens ring, Torch waves goodbye. An hour later, the police round up the evidence while Jake insists on checking the place for some blood. Angie tells him to let it go since he officially retired an hour ago. Hal, his superior, comments about his recklessness on his last day of work and informs him that the feds have arrived to speak with him. Stan Reisman, a federal agent, offers him a job at NSF to catch Torch, but Jake declines. That evening, the eradicator stitches his wound while uploading the pictures of his 11th victim when the news about him flashes on the screen. The media interviews Jake about not catching the culprit upon his retirement, so the cop leaves a message to Torch, mocking his insanity, which enrages the outlaw. Soon, Jake receives a call from the eradicator during his retirement party. The cop answers him indifferently, but the outlaw threatens him in continuing his inclination, infuriating Jake. Jake joins the NSF the following day, and Reisman informs him that they have all the data about Torch. The agent escorts Jake to a lab where he shows the replicant, the clone of Torch, from the DNA they collected, enclosed in an artificial womb. Reisman briefs him that they aren't interested in Torch, but cloning him is a trial run for the Replicant Project, which can help counter-terrorism to identify how evil minds work, since Torch's behavior pattern is similar to one. Jake asks why it has to be him, and Reisman tells him that the outlaw has chosen him, so when the replicant is ready, he'll be the one to care for him and develop him. The retired cop argues that since they already identified Torch through cloning, it'll be easier to publicize it on national TV. Still, NSF insists that it's a top-secret project, so he can only use the clone to capture the real Torch. Sometime after, Torch and Replicant's telepathic connection becomes stronger, so when the clone's life is endangered because of a new growth hormone injected to him, the original senses the distress. Therefore, Reisman orders him to be released from his artificial womb, and Jake murmurs a threatening welcome. Moments later, Replicant awakens and sees a video of the researcher, Miss Johnson, who teaches him to stand, sit, and walk. He falls to the ground and explores everything around him like a baby. Jake insults his wits, and Reisman explains that genetic memories are intact, but he needs stimuli to get used to everything, and that's when Jake is needed as his first human contact. Afterward, Jake brings him food through the door slot, and as Replicant discovers what food is, the cop tries to pull the tray, which the clone forces to claim. Soon, Replicant watches acrobatics on the screen in his room and quickly copies the movements. As Reisman gets amazed, Jake highlights that if Replicant becomes like the original, this will cause a tragedy, but the agent argues that it's disposable. When mealtime comes, Jake brings food to his room and shows him his handcuffs. The curious replicant touches it, and the cop tricks him, cuffing him to the table. The clone panics upon being stuck and dislodges the table from the wall. Jake takes his taser and electrocutes the clone, subduing him, but as he commands him to sit, the replicant repeats Miss Johnson's video of sitting, standing, and walking. The project commences, and Replicant is escorted out of the facility, cuffed and chained to Jake, as he's now under his care. The cop is given NSF papers and a gun before riding the helicopter, which the clone enjoys. Upon arriving in the city, Jake notices NSF agents tailing them, so he drives away and brings Replicant to an abandoned building. He harasses the clone and hands him the gun to force him to reveal his aggressive behavior, but he fails. The NSF agents arrive and see Replicant pointing a gun toward Jake, not understanding the situation. The cop tells them to place their weapons down, and the clone imitates them. The agents charge them to retrieve Replicant since Jake fails to follow protocol, but the cop disappointedly comments that the clone is useless, showing the empty magazine. Jake turns to leave and the clone follows, but when the agents block him, he quickly gets away and beats them using the acrobatic moves he's watched. This grabs the cop's interest, and he subdues the clone. Jake cuffs him and brings him to the restored house of Torch's victim by pretending to be interested in it. The real estate agent, Wendy, welcomes them, but since Replicant's vocabulary is limited, he repeats the curses Jake often says, so the cop alibis that his cousin is special. As the tour proceeds, Replicant sees flashes of Torch's memories of when he conducted his evil deed in the house. He goes around the house, repeating how the outlaw smoothly left. Meanwhile, Torch is walking around the city when he comes across a mother who tells her son he's a bad boy. The outlaw freezes in his tracks, remembering his past, and stares at the two. On the other hand, Jake goes to Angie's home with Replicant, and the clone watches the sweet interaction between him and Danny, Angie's son. When the cop brings out the cuffed man and attaches him to a pipe in the basement, the female cop turns anxious. She confronts her former partner, but Jake tells her it's classified. Unbeknownst to them, Danny approaches Replicant and sees him eating the dog food, so he offers this food and teaches him to say thank you. Suddenly, the cops hear Danny scream and the boy runs out with his mouth bleeding. Jake beats Replicant, but Angie stops him, explaining that the dog attacked her son, and the clone stares at Jake teary-eyed. That evening, Jake meets with Reisman, who scolds him for reporting late, beating his men, and injuring Replicant. The cop returns the clone to them, but the agent declines, pointing out Torch's warnings when he called days ago. Reisman reiterates he needs a report every 12 hours, and Jake mocks him through a gesture that Replicant imitates. They go to Jake's residence and he drags the clone to the bathroom to inspect where the tracking device is since NSF knows his every move. Mrs. Riley, Jake's mom, barges in the room and sees him examining Replicant, so the woman scolds him and reminds him that if he treats people like outlaws, they'll eventually turn that way. After contemplating, Jake brings a blanket to Replicant and the clone thanks him. As he sleeps, he sees Torch's childhood memory when his mom attacked his dad, blaming him and her son for ruining her life, commenting that he's a bad boy. On the other hand, Torch attacks the mother he met earlier, stating she's a lousy mother. Meanwhile, Jake brings Replicant to the police station. They take a picture of him and show the pictures of the victims. Jake scans the clone's image to find Torch's real identity and discovers that he's Edward Garrote. Angie signals to him that Hao has arrived, so they hurriedly leave. Jake immediately bids goodbye to his former boss, so Hao opens the computer and sees Torch's file. Jake immediately goes to the address, leaving Replicant in the car while Angie and the police follow him to the address. The cops discover an altar where Jake's picture and Torch's target are placed. They retrieve a photo of the next target and check the computer, seeing the images the eradicator collects from the victims. Unaware that Replicant is feeling something off, he escapes from the vehicle and rushes to Jake. The cops begin printing the evidence when the ink cartridge suddenly stops at the same time that Replicant arrives, calling Jake in panic. Jake yells at everyone to leave and the apartment explodes. Torch watches the commotion and Replicant heads out to find him. Upon noticing the clone is gone, Jake hurries to locate him, while Torch and his clone finally meet. Replicant finds Torch hiding in a closed bar, but the outlaw corners him, asking who he is. The clone repeats what he says, and the original slaps him, so he attempts to slap him back. However, Torch beats him, and despite holding his ground with his acrobatic move, Replicant loses since he has no intention of hurting anyone. The bar owner calls the police, and the janitor tries to stop Torch. However, the outlaw beats him up and silences the boss. Torch has Replicant at gunpoint, but the police siren rings, so he escapes. Jake and Angie receive the 911 request for patrol in the bar, so they hurry to the location and find the janitor, who narrates the commotion due to twins. Torch rides a car to escape the scene, and Replicant tries to chase after him. Afterward, the eradicator calls Jake to threaten him and ask about the clone, so the cop challenges him to figure it out, and he proclaims he will. Meanwhile, Replicant gets lost in the city like a child left on his own. Hours later, Jake calls Reisman and baits him into tracking Replicant, while keeping the secret that he lost him due to the commotion. Finally, Jake discovers that the clone is in the red light district. A harlot approaches Replicant and brings him to a hotel. The clone sees an adult show on the TV, so he imitates what he's seen. However, the woman stops him since he isn't paying. She calls for security but notices how innocent Replicant acts, so she urges him to escape. Unfortunately, the guards arrive and beat him up. The woman tries to reason with them, but she's also beaten. Upon seeing her get hurt, Replicant fights back. He checks if the woman is fine, but the police barge in with Jake. Afterward, Jake and Angie bring him to the police station to ask about the latest target. Replicant remembers the phrase "bad boy" but can't explain it. As the cops force him to remember and give clues, he recalls how Torch took the lives of many, making him feel terrible. Before they ride the car, Replicant asks Jake who he is. So the man explains in the simplest terms possible, but points out that the original is bad. He removes the clone's cuffs and lets him ride shotgun. They go to a park and eat ice cream. When the clone is relaxed, Jake asks about the next victim and gives him some markers, so the clone draws the location. Replicant leads him to a hotel and follows the path of Torch. In the elevator, the fire alarm rings. They arrive at the room too late, but Replicant runs after the culprit, so Jake follows. The clone brings him to the boiler room, but he suddenly locks the cop in. He proceeds to an underground passage while Jake tries to escape. Replicant meets Torch and explains who he is. The Eradicator explains they're identical and Jake can't be trusted. He adds that the cop will end him, while he, as the original, will protect him. Jake charges toward them, but Replicant helps Torch escape, asking the cop if he will take his life. Soon, at home, Jake receives a call from Torch, who asks to put him on speakerphone to let his clone hear that he's precious to him. Then he declares that Jake is his next target, and the identicals synchronize. Jake asks the reason, but they mention he'll know in time, so the cop cuffs Replicant to a pole and leaves. Meanwhile, Torch visits his mother in a hospital to narrate how he ended another mom's life. The old lady calls him a bad boy, but the son proclaims he did it for her. On the other hand, Replicant recalls the memories of Torch when his mom locked him up in a room while the stove blazed in flames and the music box played the lullaby. The mother yelled that Luke Savard, Torch's real name, shouldn't have been born. He relays the name to Jake, and he investigates it. Later, Angie informs him that Luke had a tragic past. His mother ended his father's life and set the house on fire. It only rained that night, which helped the kid survive. The mother is now in a hospital, so Jake and Replicant visit her. Unfortunately, the receptionist informs them that the woman has passed away due to cardiac arrest, so she hands them her things. Jake asks if they can see the body, and Replicant caresses the face of the old woman, mourning her demise. Suddenly, Torch barges in with an abducted nurse, so the cop drops his gun. He beats Jake to his heart's content, while Replicant watches in sullenly. Torch instructs the clone to stab Jake, but he refuses. The outlaw says it's alright since he'll end the clone to let the police believe he's him. Replicant stares at him eye to eye, stating that Luke Savard is a bad boy for taking his mother's life. The Eradicator, triggered by his trauma, loses composure and shoots his mother, so Jake takes the chance to fight back. Replicant tries to help, but he's stabbed by a scalpel, and Torch runs away from Jake. The cop checks on the clone to calm him down and instructs him to stay put before following Torch. Meanwhile, Replicant removes the scalpel on his chest and grabs the gun that Jake dropped. With resolve, he stands to follow them. Torch drives an ambulance to escape, and Jake clings to the moving vehicle. The outlaw does his best to drop him off, but the cop successfully enters the vehicle. Jake strangles him with a seatbelt, and the man drives recklessly to outbalance Jake. As the ambulance is about to crash, the cop jumps off, and the vehicle topples over, falling to a staircase. Jake checks the site, but Torch is gone. While looking for the outlaw, he's hit with a shovel and falls to the ground. Torch drags him to the crematorium while singing the lullaby from his music box and places Jake on the incinerator beam. As his feet burn, Replicant arrives with a gun and saves the cop. Then, the outlaw tricks Replicant and hits the gun away. He charges at his clone, but the double uses his acrobatic skills to avoid him. Finally, Replicant becomes determined to fight back, and the combat becomes equal as they have the same moves since the clone can read the original's mind. Then, he uses Torch's shock to take the upper hand and beats him while Jake crawls to grab the gun. When he's about to finish Torch, he realizes he can't, so he stops. Replicant walks away and heads to Jake, but Torch hits his head with a shovel. Jake shoots the Eradicator as the Replicant falls. The cop crawls to the clone, but the genetic copy declares his family is gone while looking at Torch. Jake corrects him, stating that his family is him. Replicant mumbles that he sees rain in his eyes. A live wire sparks and fire spreads to the gas tank, so Jake assists the clone out of the crematorium. But once they step out, Replicant pushes him away and locks himself in. An explosion follows, and soon, the police arrive. Jake mourns Replicant's death, and Reisman informs him that only the lifeless bodies in the fridge drawers are the ones that aren't damaged. Afterward, Jake surrenders his gun and walks away. A few days later, Jake tries to distract himself by playing with Danny. Looking out the window, he sees a hooded man, similar to Replicant, placing something in the mailbox. Jake heads out with Danny and discovers the music box inside. He sighs in relief and comments that the clone likes the rain. On the other hand, Replicant returns to the red light district and meets with the harlot. The woman gladly greets him and they walk away hand in hand.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.